What would you do if you got a message from a ghost? A ghost you thought had vanished from the universe 300 years ago? That's the impossible situation Ambassador Reth found himself in. He was an old man, one of the last of his kind who could actually remember Earth and its fierce, stubborn people. For centuries, humans were just a footnote in a history book. But when a strange, ancient signal flashed on his screen, a code not seen since the dawn of galactic travel, his old hand started to tremble. He whispered, "It can't be." But it was. The humans were back. And if you believe in keeping promises, no matter the cost, then you need to stick around for this story. For Reth, it felt like yesterday. 3 centuries ago, his people, the Kuri, had stumbled upon Earth as it was about to be wiped from existence. A planet-killer asteroid was screaming toward the human homeworld, and their technology was just too primitive to stop it. In a final desperate plea, humanity broadcast a cry for help into the blackness of space, with no idea if anyone was listening. The Kuri heard them. Their colossal colony ship, the Endless Dawn, was the only vessel in range. They changed course, and all 50,000 Kuri on board used their ship's powerful gravity engines to rip the asteroid off its path, a heroic move that tore their own ship to shreds in the process. Every single one of them, 50,000 souls, sacrificed themselves to save a world they had never even seen. The people of Earth were shattered by the gesture, overwhelmed with gratitude. They offered everything they owned, but the Kuri asked for something else. They saw humanity's incredible potential, but also their capacity for self-destruction. They worried what would happen if such a young, aggressive species expanded into the galaxy too quickly. So they made a deal. Humanity would stay within their own solar system for 300 years. No contact, no starships, just time to grow up. The humans, heartbroken but full of honor, agreed to the terms. The rest of the galaxy had a good laugh. They all figured the hot-headed humans would break the promise within a generation. But they never did. For 300 silent years, humanity kept its word. The galaxy moved on and forgot all about them, until Reth played that stunning message for the Galactic Council. The entire chamber went silent as they listened. But Director Fenn, a pompous bureaucrat with 6 beady eyes, just waved a hand dismissively. "This is meaningless," he scoffed. "The humans are probably extinct. This is just some ancient automated signal." Reth slowly shook his head. "You don't get it. I was there. I met them." "Promises don't last 3 centuries, another council member sneered. "To a human," Reth said, his voice firm, "a promise is everything." After hours of debate, the council grudgingly agreed to send a tiny probe, but Reth knew it wasn't enough. He had to go himself. 3 days later, his ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human system, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A single dark ship was waiting there for him. It was all sharp angles and smooth black metal, unlike any design he'd ever encountered, and it radiated a kind of calm, terrifying power. It wasn't a large ship, maybe holding 100 people, but it looked incredibly deadly. A request to communicate appeared on his screen immediately. When Reth answered, the face of a human woman filled the monitor. She had dark skin, closely cropped hair, and eyes that seemed to look right through him. Her uniform was plain, marked only with a patch showing Earth set against a field of stars. "Ambassador Reth," she said, her voice perfectly steady. "My name is Anne Brooks. I speak for all of humanity." Reth was floored. I can't believe you kept the agreement." A faint smile touched her lips. "We gave our word. 50,000 of your people gave their lives for every man, woman, and child on our planet. We could never forget a debt like that, she went on. Every child on Earth learns the names of the 50,000 we remember. Something tight and painful clenched in Reth's chest. The galaxy has changed, he said, his voice thick with sorrow. My people, we are not the great civilization you once met. I know, Anne said gently. We've been watching. We saw what happened to the Kuri. We know about the fading. Reth squeezed his eyes shut, the pain as sharp as ever. The fading was a genetic plague that was slowly erasing his species. Fewer children were born every year, and most of them died before they were grown. The Kuri were facing total extinction in less than 2 generations. There is nothing that can be done, Reth whispered. We have accepted our fate. No, Anne said, and her voice suddenly turned to steel. You saved us. Now we save you. The debt is owed, Ambassador Reth. It is time. Tell us how humanity can serve the Kuri people. Reth was speechless. You can't be serious. You don't owe us anything. The 300 years of isolation was the repayment. Anne shook her head. That's not how we see it. 50,000 of your people died for us. We will not let that sacrifice be for nothing. We will not let your people fade away while we still live and breathe. This is who we are. The Council will never permit it, Reth warned her. They're afraid of you. They are wise to be, Anne replied simply. We are dangerous, but never to our friends. Never to our friends, she said again. Will you take us to your homeworld, Ambassador? Will you let us try to help? Reth thought of his own children, both lost to the fading before they'd even reached the age of 20. He thought of the grandchildren he would never get to hold. He thought of his entire civilization, once the saviors of a world, now dying in silence. Yes, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I will take you home. Anne gave a single sharp nod. Then let's begin. Tell your matriarch that humanity is coming to pay its debt. The screen went dark, but Reth just sat there, staring out at the stars, feeling a tiny spark of impossible hope catch fire in his heart. He had no idea if the humans could actually do anything to help, but he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had completely forgotten what humans were really like. They'd forgotten what happens when humanity decides that someone or something is worth fighting for. And Reth had a strong feeling that a lot of very powerful people were about to get a rude awakening. Just as he predicted, news of humanity's return threw the Galactic Council into a full-blown panic. Emergency meetings were called day and night, and dusty old security files were cracked open, revealing exactly why the older species were suddenly so terrified. Director Fenn stood before the council, all 6 of his eyes blinking nervously as he brought up the old data. I've reviewed the historical files, he announced, his voice trembling, and what I've discovered is deeply concerning. An image of Earth appeared, covered in bright red warning labels. Humanity evolved on a Class 12 death world, Fenn explained. To put that in perspective, most of our species come from Class 3 or 4 worlds. Anything above a Class 8 is considered completely uninhabitable. A wave of shocked whispers spread through the room. A Class 12 world was the stuff of nightmares. The gravity is crushing, Fenn went on, reading from the report. The atmosphere is a toxic soup. The weather is a constant apocalypse. The predators are monstrous, and new diseases can evolve in a matter of hours. And to top it all off, the humans spent thousands of years fighting each other with some of the most horrifying weapons imaginable. A council member spoke up. But surely they've moved past that. Reth let out a short, bitter laugh from his seat. You don't understand. Humans didn't just survive their world, they thrived because of it. Every catastrophe made them stronger. Every war made them smarter. Every loss made them more determined. Fen nodded grimly. The records confirm this. The moment they first reached for the stars, they were solving problems our best scientists couldn't even begin to understand. When a plague swept through the border colonies, he continued, a group of human medical students engineered a cure in 3 weeks. Our top research institutes had been working on it for decades with no success. What exactly are you trying to say? Another council member demanded. I'm saying we can't let them get involved in galactic affairs, Fen shouted. They're too unpredictable, too willing to break all the rules. During one conflict, a single human warship destroyed an entire battle fleet using a maneuver our strategists had labeled mathematically impossible. They rammed the enemy command ship at faster-than-light speed, Reth added quietly. The crew knew it was a suicide mission. They did it anyway to save millions of lives. That is what humans do. The entire chamber was completely silent. Finally, someone asked the question they were all thinking. What do they want from us now? They want to help the Kuri, Reth answered. They know about the fading. That caused an instant uproar. Fen slammed his gavel for silence. The Kuri situation is a tragedy, but it is hopeless, he declared. Hundreds of our best scientific teams have studied the fading. The genetic damage is irreversible. There is no cure. You can tell that to humanity, Reth said, a faint smile on his face. They don't really believe in the word impossible. Then they are fools, Fen snapped. Perhaps, Reth replied, but they are fools who keep their promises. And 300 years ago, 50,000 of my people died for them. And at that exact moment, humanity decided it was their turn to join the conversation. A new voice, sharp and crystal clear, sliced through the council's argument. It shouldn't have been possible. The voice was coming through their private encrypted communication system. All at once, every screen in the chamber lit up with the face of Anne Brooks. Sorry to drop in, she said, though her tone was anything but apologetic. We just thought you all should know what we're about to do. Fen, the council director, sputtered. This is a secure, closed session. Anne just smirked. Your security is a joke. I think it took us, 7 minutes to crack? But that's not important. What's important is this. We are going to the Kuri homeworld. We are going to study this fading, and we are going to fix it. That's impossible! Fen began to yell. Anne cut him right off. We put 12 men on our own moon using computers with less processing power than the device in your pocket. Imagine being told you can't save the very people who once saved your entire world. That's the impossible situation Ambassador Anne Brooks found herself in, facing down a council of aliens who cared more about rules than lives. If you think you know how this story ends, I promise you don't, so stick with me. We split the atom before we had decent lab coats. Anne's voice cut through the chaos of the council chamber. We sent rovers to other planets when our own spacesuits barely held together. Humans have always done the impossible. This is just next on the list. She stared them down. Let me be perfectly clear. We are not asking your permission. We are telling you, as a courtesy, what we are about to do. The Kuri saved our species. Now we're going to save them. This is not a debate. A stuffy council security chief sneered into his microphone. You brought a single ship. We have thousands. You can't defy us. Anne offered a small, cold smile that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. We brought one diplomatic ship. She let the correction hang in the air. Would you like to see what's waiting just beyond your sensor range? The main view screen behind her flickered, shifting from her face to the black void of space just outside their territory. And there they were. Silent, dark and massive, not just a few ships, dozens, maybe hundreds of them, looming like ghosts in the dark. Their size alone was enough to send a chill down every spine in that chamber. 300 years is a long time, Anne said, her voice now a calm whisper. We didn't just sit around. We built, we learned, we got ready. History taught us to hope for the best but prepare for the worst. We hoped we'd never need this fleet, but we were ready. This is a threat, one of the council members, Fen, screamed. No, Anne replied, her voice solid as steel. This is a promise. We are going to help the Kuri. Anyone who stands in our way is going to have a very, very bad day. But let's also be clear. We don't want your territory. We don't want your power. We are here to pay back a debt. You can either help us or you can get out of our way. The choice is yours. And just like that, the transmission cut out, leaving the chamber in absolute chaos. Some were screaming for war, others begged for diplomacy. But then Reth, a wise old member of the council, slowly pushed himself to his feet. His old bones creaked, but his voice was steady and strong. You're all terrified, he said, looking around the room. Good. You should be, because I've met humans before. I know what they can do when they set their minds to protecting something. What are you getting at, Reth? Fen demanded. I'm saying, Reth continued, that 300 years ago we saved them. And now they consider us theirs, and humans protect what is theirs with a level of ferocity you can't even begin to comprehend. They don't give up. They don't know the meaning of defeat. They will literally tear a sun apart with their bare hands if it means getting the job done. That's insane, someone muttered from the back benches. Yes, Reth agreed, nodding slowly. And that is precisely what makes them so terrifying, and such unbelievably good friends. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to call my matriarch. The humans are coming to visit, and I think she'd appreciate a heads up. He turned and walked out, leaving the council to their bickering. Reth knew it was pointless. Humanity had already decided. And when humans decide something, the universe itself seems to bend to their will. He just prayed his people could be saved before humanity had to give the galaxy a violent reminder of what they were capable of. The Kuri homeworld was once the jewel of this entire sector of space, a planet of gleaming cities and billions of souls living in harmony. Now, it was a ghost town. Anne stared out the ship's viewport as they made their descent. The planet was still a beautiful marble of blue oceans and green continents, but it felt hollow. The city lights below were faint, like dying embers. There were almost no ships in orbit. It was a civilization slowly fading into darkness. Give me the population count, she asked softly. Dr. Henry Okoye, a kind-eyed man from Lagos who had seen far too much sorrow, checked his tablet. 193 million kuri remaining, he said, his voice thick with sadness. Down from a peak of 14 billion. Anne squeezed her eyes shut. 14 billion lives whittled down to less than 200 million, a whole species dying in slow motion. How long do they have? She asked. At this rate, maybe 40 years until the last one is gone, Henry answered, but it will get faster near the end. It always does. Commander Patricia Walsh stood nearby, her arms crossed. She was a tough, compact woman who carried herself like someone used to winning impossible fights. The Council is still spamming our communications, she reported. They're demanding we turn around. Let them yell, Anne said without looking away from the window. We didn't come this far to be scared off. Their ship sliced through the atmosphere without so much as a shudder. Human technology had leaped forward in their 3 centuries of isolation. Everything they built was quieter, stronger, and better. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson firsthand. They touched down on a landing pad near the capital. All around them, graceful towers reached for the clouds, but Anne could feel the emptiness of the place. So many skyscrapers with dark, vacant windows, streets with no traffic, gorgeous parks now overgrown and wild because no one was left to tend them. A small welcome party of 5 kuri waited for them. Each one had 4 arms and skin that shimmered with colors reflecting their emotions. Right now, they were all muted shades of gray and blue, the colors of deep sadness and defeat. The one in the middle was their leader. She held herself with a weary dignity, and her eyes contained a sorrow so profound it made Anne's own heart ache. I am Matriarch Sela, she said, her English flawless. Welcome to our home, Ambassador Brooks, though I must confess I do not understand why you have come. Anne walked forward and did something that made her own security detail gasp. She knelt on one knee and bowed her head low to the ground. 50,000 of your people gave their lives to save mine, Anne said, her voice clear and strong. We remember every single one of their names. We tell their story to our children. We carved their names onto a monument that covers 3 square kilometers. We have not forgotten, Matriarch Sela. We will never forget. The matriarch's colors softened, a faint shimmer of gold mixing with the gray. Was it surprise? Or maybe even a flicker of hope? Please, rise, Sila said gently. You owe us no debt. It was paid when you accepted 3 centuries of isolation. Anne stood and looked the matriarch directly in her large, tired eyes. With all due respect, matriarch, that's not how humans operate. Your people saved us. Now, it's our turn to save you. It is that simple. The fading has no cure, Sila replied, her voice heavy with grief. We have tried everything. Our best scientists, the Council's top doctors, researchers from a dozen worlds, they all failed. We have accepted our fate. Well, we haven't, Anne countered. Dr. Okoye here is the most brilliant geneticist humanity has ever produced. His team cured the Cairo plague in 4 months. They literally rebuilt the European genome after the Great Collapse. If anyone can help you, he can. Henry stepped forward with a respectful nod. Matriarch Sela, I'll need complete access to your medical archives, your genetic databases, and every patient you have. I need to see everything. You will have it, Scylla promised. But I must warn you not to raise your hopes. This disease has broken many brilliant minds before you. Then it's a good thing we humans are so stubborn, Henry said with a faint smile. We don't break so easily. The matriarch led them on a tour of the city. Anne had to physically stop herself from staring at the empty apartment towers, the silent monorail tracks, the playgrounds where the sound of children's laughter was just a distant memory. This was what extinction looked like up close. They finally reached the main hospital, a massive complex built to serve thousands that now cared for less than 100. The Kuri were conserving their resources. Henry and his team disappeared into the labs, and within minutes, they were firing off requests for data, tissue samples, and genetic sequences. Anne walked with the matriarch through a once beautiful garden that was now fighting for its life. "Why do you care so much?" Scylla asked after a long silence. "Your people are safe. Your world is thriving. We are strangers to you." "My grandmother used to tell me a story," Anne said, her voice soft. "Back when the asteroid was about to hit, when your people died saving us, everyone on Earth was watching. Every single human saw your ship sacrifice itself. My grandmother said that the entire planet wept that day. Strangers hugged each other in the streets. Old enemies put down their weapons. It was all because 50,000 souls we had never met gave up their lives so that we could have a future." She stopped walking and turned to the old matriarch. "That day changed us. It showed us what we were capable of becoming. We spent the next 300 years trying to be worthy of that sacrifice. We ended our wars. We healed our planet. We built a new civilization on one single principle, that all life is precious, and every life is worth fighting for. You gave that to us, matriarch, you and those 50,000 heroes." Scylla's colors swirled in a storm of emotions too complex for Anne to understand. "We have nothing to offer you in return," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't want payment," Anne replied gently. "We just want you to live. That's all the payment we need." For the next 3 days, Henry and his team worked non-stop, fueled by endless cups of coffee and a fierce determination, tearing into the Kuri genetic code with an intensity that only humans seemed to have. For 4 agonizing days, Anne watched her team slam into one dead end after another, trying to solve a mystery that was killing an entire species. She saw brilliant minds clash and tempers flare. But then Henry found her, a strange, unreadable look on his face. "I've got it," he said, his voice strained. "Anne, you need to see this." In the sealed briefing room, it was just Anne, Henry, Patricia, and the Kuri matriarch, Scylla. Henry splashed his findings across the main screen, a chaotic swirl of DNA helices and genetic charts. "The fading," he said, cutting straight to the chase. "It's not a disease. It's a weapon. Someone engineered it." The room went dead silent. Scylla's beautiful, vibrant colors drained away, leaving her a ghastly, hollow white. "Explain," Anne commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerously low calm. "The genetic decay is too flawless," Henry continued. "It's following a blueprint, a precise and deliberate attack. This was no accident of nature. Somebody unleashed a genetic plague on the Kuri people about 287 years ago. It was designed to weave itself into their DNA and cause a slow-motion cascading system failure that would pass down through generations. And this is the sickest part. It was made to look exactly like a natural decline. Whoever did this wanted the Kuri to just fade into nothing, thinking it was their own cosmic misfortune. Patricia let out a stream of furious curses in 3 different languages, a cold rage building in her gut. "Can you find the monsters who did this?" she snarled. "I already did," Henry said. "The biological signature they used is incredibly unique. It's like a fingerprint, and it matches the genetic engineering style of only one civilization in the known galaxy." He changed the display. A new image appeared. A species Anne had never laid eyes on. They were tall, slender beings with skin like living crystal, covered in a complex web of sensory organs. "The Vosk conquered," Henry said. "They're the ones. Matriarch Sella, they have been systematically murdering your people for almost 3 centuries. And they were so careful, they were certain nobody would ever find out until it was too late." Sella crumpled into a nearby chair, all 4 of her arms trembling violently. "But why? What could we have possibly done to deserve this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "That doesn't matter anymore," Anne said, her voice laced with a cold promise that made even Patricia's blood run cold. "What matters is they hurt our friends. They tried to commit genocide, and they were arrogant enough to think they'd get away with it." She locked eyes with Henry. "Can you stop it?" "Yes," he answered, without a shred of hesitation. "Now that I know what I'm looking for, I can create a cure. It'll take time, but I can reverse the damage." "Good," Anne said flatly. "Get to work. Patricia, send a priority message to Fleet Command. They have new orders." A slow, predatory smile spread across Patricia's face. "And what might those orders be, Ambassador?" Anne's gaze returned to the image of the Vosk, her eyes as hard as diamonds, and her voice filled with the quiet fury that only humans possess when pushed too far. "We're going to pay the Vosk a visit. We're going to have a little chat. And then we're going to teach the galaxy a lesson it should have learned 300 years ago." "What lesson?" Sella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anne looked right at her, and in the human's eyes the matriarch saw something both absolutely terrifying and wonderfully comforting. "You never, ever hurt our friends." The human fleet ripped out of warp space on the edge of Vosk territory, materializing from nothing like vengeful ghosts. Across the galaxy, it felt like everyone held their breath. On the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Dawn, named for the Kuri ship that saved Earth from extinction, Admiral Derek Stone stood like a statue. He was a man in his 50s, forged from hardship and grit, with salt and pepper hair and scars that told stories of surviving on a world that tried to kill you. Around him, his crew moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency. "Status report," he ordered. 47 ships present and accounted for," his tactical officer responded. "All systems green. We're holding our position exactly 1 light minute outside the Vosk border." "Perfect," Derek said. "Open a channel. Broadcast on all frequencies. I want every last Vosk with a working radio to hear me." The communications officer gave a crisp nod. "Channels open, Admiral." Derek took a deep breath, and his voice thundered across the silence of space. This is Admiral Derek Stone of the Terran Defense Fleet, speaking to the Vosk Concorde. 287 years ago, you committed an act of unimaginable evil. You deployed a genetic weapon against the Kuri people. You orchestrated the slow, quiet murder of billions, and you hid your crime behind a lie. You were wrong. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in across an empire. On planets and ships throughout Vosk space, billions of crystalline beings listened, stunned. He needed them to understand what was coming. The Kuri are our allies. They are our friends. They saved our entire civilization when we were on the verge of annihilation, and you tried to wipe them from the universe. So here's what's going to happen. You will surrender every single person involved in the creation and deployment of that bioweapon. You will turn over every piece of research related to this atrocity. You have 12 standard hours to comply. If you refuse, we will come and take them. And I promise you, you will not enjoy it. The transmission ended. Derek turned to his officers. And now we wait. On the Vosk homeworld, the Leadership Council scrambled into an emergency meeting. Panic was an emotion the logic-driven Vosk rarely felt, but it was thick in the air. Supreme Coordinator Vesh stood before the council, his crystal body shimmering nervously. How many human ships are we facing? 47, his military advisor replied. A token force by our standards. We can have 600 of our warships ready in less than an hour. Then why, Vesh demanded, is everyone acting like the world is ending? An old council member, one who had studied the forbidden archives, spoke up. Because they are human, he said softly. Because they evolved on a death world. Because everything we know about them screams that this is a fight we cannot win. That's just superstition, Vesh shot back. They're one species with a tiny fleet. We outnumber them more than 13-1. The Trellin Armada said the same thing during the border wars, the old counselor replied. They had better numbers, too. The humans wiped out their entire fleet in 6 hours. A fluke, Vesh insisted. A one-time victory. Then allow me to show you what our intelligence gathered, the elder said, bringing data to the main screen. Human warships aren't designed like ours. They're built with layers of redundant systems and sealed compartments. They are covered in armor so thick it would grind our ships to a halt. But humans don't care about speed. They care about being able to hit you back, no matter what you throw at them. Images of human ships bristling with weapons flashed on the screen. Their arsenals are brutal and direct, he went on. They use missiles, railgun slugs, and simple metal rods fired at speeds that defy physics. They use radiation weapons we declared barbaric centuries ago. They use tactics that no sane, civilized species would ever consider. Like what? Vesh asked, a sliver of real fear finally cutting through his arrogance. Ramming, the elder said, his voice flat. They will intentionally pilot their billion-dollar warships straight into ours just to win an engagement. Their pilots can withstand G-forces that would shatter our crystalline bodies. They wear suits that let them operate in conditions that would flash boil us. And most importantly, they absolutely refuse to give up. A deep, chilling quiet fell over the chamber. Finally, a council member asked, "So what do we do?" "We could fight," the military advisor said weakly. "We might even win." And what would be the cost? The elder retorted. We attacked the Kuri because they were weak, a dying species. Humanity is not weak. They are angry. And an angry human is the most dangerous thing in this galaxy. Vesh considered his options. His people had committed what they thought was the perfect crime. Wiping out the Kuri was a cold, logical move to eliminate a future rival, all under the cover of a natural tragedy. No one was ever supposed to know. But these primates from a death world had figured it out, and now they were here, demanding a price in blood. Send our reply, Vesh finally ordered. Tell them we have no knowledge of such a weapon. Tell them their accusations are baseless and insulting. Order them to leave our sovereign territory at once or face the consequences. The old council member let out a quiet sigh of despair as the message was transmitted. The 12 hours passed. The human fleet didn't move an inch, a silent, menacing line drawn across the stars. The second the deadline expired, they appeared. The Vosk had gathered their entire fleet, 600 warships forming a magnificent shield around their home system. They felt secure. They had the numbers and the home turf advantage. They were certain they could drive back the human attackers. They were dead wrong. The human ships surged forward, moving at a speed the Vosk's models had never predicted. There was no graceful maneuvering, no clever tactical formations. They just came straight ahead, like a pack of wolves that had finally been unleashed. The Vosk fired first, their advanced energy weapons lashing out, tools designed to disable ships, not destroy them. It was supposed to be a civilized conflict, focused on minimizing casualties, but the energy beams just splashed harmlessly against the human ship's armor. The human vessels didn't even flinch, and then they returned fire. That's when the Vosk learned what a real war was. Missiles descended in blinding clouds, hundreds at a time, completely overwhelming the Vosk's defensive systems. Simple chunks of metal, fired at near light speed, ripped through the void, punching through Vosk shields and hulls as if they were made of tissue paper. Then came the radiation warheads, flooding the area with deadly energy the Vosk had no way to counter. In the first hour of the fight, the Vosk lost 80 ships. The humans lost 2. "Fall back," Vesh screamed, his voice filled with panic. "Retreat to the second line." But the humans showed them no mercy. They pressed their assault relentlessly, hunting down the fleeing Vosk ships and dismantling them with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. Human pilots were pulling off maneuvers that should have been impossible. Their ships weaved and dodged through the chaos, striking every single vulnerability in the Vosk formations. When one desperate Vosk commander tried to ram a human ship, the smaller vessel simply fired its thrusters at the last moment, sidestepped the attack, and blew out the Vosk ship's engines. It was left dead in space as the humans moved on to their next kill. 6 hours later, the Vosk fleet was in ruins, its ships scattering in a desperate, chaotic retreat. Some even tried to surrender, but the humans either couldn't hear them or didn't care. They just kept attacking, kept firing, and kept eliminating them. From his command bridge, Derek watched the entire Vosk defense network get wiped off the map. "Hold your fire on any ship broadcasting surrender codes," he ordered, "but continue to neutralize their military infrastructure." "Sir, the Council is desperately trying to open negotiations," his communications officer said. "Let them know they missed their chance," Derek replied, his voice as cold as space. Now they can sit and watch what happens when you murder our allies. The human fleet moved toward the Vosk homeworld, but they didn't target the cities or the civilians. Instead, with surgical precision, they vaporized every military installation, every weapons factory, and every single shipyard. They used orbital strikes and pinpoint missile attacks, grinding the entire Vosk war machine to dust. The Vosk could only look on in absolute horror as 3 centuries of military might was erased in less than a day. Finally, once every warship was either a floating wreck or completely powerless, and every military base was a smoldering ruin, Derrick opened a new channel. "The fighting is done," he announced, "but the consequences are just getting started. You will turn over every individual involved in the genocide of the Curie. You will provide us with all of your research, every last document and all related evidence. You have 6 hours. If you decline, we will begin dismantling your civilian infrastructure, your power grids, your water purification plants, your communication networks. We won't harm your people, but we will send your society back to the Dark Ages. It's your choice." This time, the Vok didn't even hesitate. They knew they had lost. Coordinator Vesh himself led the delegation to the human flagship, holding data crystals containing everything the humans had asked for. His crystalline form was dim, clouded by a mixture of shame and pure terror. Derrick met him in the hangar bay, surrounded by human marines in intimidating powered armor. The humans were shorter than the Vosk, but they radiated a sense of power and danger that made them seem enormous. "Why?" Vesh whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why do you care so deeply about the Curie? They aren't even your kind." Derrick just looked at him with icy contempt. "Because they were there for us when we needed help. Because they showed us a better way to be. Because when you care about someone, you protect them. A concept you people obviously can't grasp. We were protecting ourselves." Vesh protested weakly. "The Curie were becoming too powerful. So you chose to exterminate their entire species," Derrick stated, his voice flat. "Where I'm from, we have a word for that, genocide, and we have zero tolerance for it. Not today, not ever, no excuses." He took the data crystals from Vesh's trembling hands. "You should be thankful we aren't the monsters you are. We could have scorched your world. We could have done to you exactly what you did to the Curie, but we are better than that. We don't murder innocents." Derrick leaned in, his voice dropping to a calm conversational level that was far more frightening than any shout. "But I need you to understand something, Coordinator. If you ever, and I mean ever, threaten the Curie again, we will come back, and next time we won't be this forgiving." "Now get off my ship!" Vesh practically stumbled over himself to leave, and Derrick turned to his crew. "Get Ambassador Brooks on the line. We got what we needed. Let's go home." In the days that followed, the Galactic Council convened an emergency meeting, and for the first time in 300 years, they learned what real fear was. Director Fenn stood before the assembly, his 6 eyes flicking nervously between the different species. On the main screen, footage from the battle at Vos Prime played on a loop. 600 warships reduced to space junk in less than 24 hours. Military bases turned to craters, and entire civilization's defenses just gone. "This is an outrage," shouted Representative Corvin of the Dreth Collective. "Humanity has waged war on a council member. They must face sanctions. Their fleet should be disarmed. They must be what exactly?" Reth interjected, his voice sharp. "Fought? Conquered? By all means, Representative Corvin, tell us how you intend to succeed where 600 Vosk warships failed." Corvin fell silent. No one had a good answer. Another representative, a timid creature from the Helix Federation, piped up. "They deployed radiation weapons. Those are forbidden by the Civilized Warfare Accords." "Humanity never signed those accords," Reth noted. "They were completely cut off from the galaxy when those rules were made. You can't punish them for breaking a treaty they never agreed to." "That's a technicality," Fen snapped. "No," Reth said with finality, "that's the reality. Humanity operates by its own set of rules, its own moral compass, and frankly, after reviewing the evidence they provided about the Vosk's actions, I believe what they did was more than justified." The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives began yelling at each other. Fen raised his arms, trying to restore order. The Vosk situation was a domestic issue, Fen claimed. The decline of the Curie was unfortunate, but it was not the business of outsiders. "The Vosk systematically murdered billions of innocent beings," Reth shot back. "They engineered a bioweapon specifically to conceal their crime. And you want to call that a domestic issue? You believe genocide is something we should just look away from?" "The humans had no right to intervene," another delegate shouted. "The humans had every right," Reth countered. "They were defending their friends. Or has that word become meaningless around here?" A new voice suddenly sliced through the noise. The main screen changed, showing Ann Brooks, who had once again breached their secure network as if walking through an unlocked door. "Good morning, council members," she said with a cheerful smile. "I figured you might be curious about what humanity is planning to do next." "Get out of our private channels," Fen demanded. "Your security is still terrible," Anne commented. "You really ought to invest in better encryption. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to inform you that Dr. Okoye has successfully developed a cure for the fading. Within 6 months, every single Curie will be healthy again. Their population will recover and begin to thrive. The attempt to wipe them out has failed." For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then the room exploded with questions. Anne waited patiently for them to quiet down. "The cure is derived from human genetic technology. It's safe, effective, and permanent. We're providing it to the Curie free of charge with no strings attached." "Just like that?" someone asked suspiciously. "You saved their entire race and want nothing in return?" "We saved them because they once saved us." Anne said simply, "That's how friendship is supposed to be. At least that's how it is for humans." "Maybe you all have a different way of doing things." Fen leaned forward. "And the Vosh? You brought their military to its knees. You embarrassed them in front of the entire galaxy. How are we supposed to handle that?" Anne's warm expression turned to stone. "The Voch are guilty of genocide. They slaughtered billions. We handed you all the proof you could ever need. What you do with that is your decision. But humanity needs you to understand one thing with absolute clarity." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, ensuring she had the undivided attention of every representative. "We are not your enemy. We have no desire to conquer or rule you. All we want is to live in a galaxy where friends look out for each other, where the powerful defend the powerless and where genocidal monsters are actually held accountable. If you can give us a galaxy like that, we will gladly be your partners. If you can't, then we'll continue to do what needs to be done on our own." "That sounds very much like a threat," Corvin pointed out. "It's a promise," Anne corrected him. "This galaxy has forgotten what it means to believe in something, what it means to risk your own life for someone else. You've forgotten how to honor your word, especially when it's inconvenient. Humanity remembers. We learned it from the Curie 300 years ago when they sacrificed 50,000 of their own people just to save us." She leaned in toward the camera. "You're all so lost in your laws, your territories, and your politics. You've forgotten about justice, about honor, about doing the right thing simply because it is the right thing to do. The Voch attempted to exterminate an entire species because they saw them as an obstacle, and you want to condemn us for stopping them?" Silence fell over the chamber. The truth was a bitter pill, but it was impossible to deny. Anne stood tall. "Humanity is re-entering galactic society. We will be good neighbors, if you'll let us, but we will not be intimidated. We will not turn a blind eye to evil just to make things easier, and we will always, without exception, protect our friends. Don't forget it." The transmission ended. The council chamber was quiet for a long, heavy moment. Finally, Reth broke the silence. "I move that we officially recognize humanity as an independent power, not as members of this council, but as our equals. Let them carve their own path, let them live by their own code, and let us all pray that we never give them a reason to consider us their enemies." "They are dangerous," Fenn said, his voice low. "They are," Reth conceded. "But they are also honorable, fiercely loyal, and willing to fight injustice when the rest of us look away. The galaxy needs more of that, not less." The vote was put forward. It was a narrow margin, but the council passed the motion. Humanity would be acknowledged as an independent power, free to govern its own space and defend its allies as it deemed necessary. It wasn't quite a friendship, not yet, but it was a beginning. On the planet Kuyan, Matriarch Sella stood in the medical bay, watching as Dr. Okoye administered the very first round of treatments. For the first time in a generation, there was hope. The Curie patients, who were once believed to be on a slow, irreversible path to extinction, were recovering. The genetic plague was being cured, and life was returning to a people on the verge of disappearing forever. Sella found Ambassador Anne Brooks in the Starlight Garden, gazing up at the endless night sky. She approached her quietly. "Our doctors believe that within a single generation, our population will reach 1 billion again," Sella said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "They say my people will live, that we will thrive, and that we will reclaim the future that was stolen from us." Anne just nodded. "Good. That's all we ever wanted." But Sella had to know. "Why? Why risk everything for us? You could have remained safe in your little corner of the galaxy. You could have let us die out and no one would have ever held it against you." At last, Anne turned, the distant stars reflected in her eyes. "When I was a little girl," Anne started, "my grandmother took me to see the great memorial, the one carved with 50,000 names. She told me, 'Every single name on this wall belongs to a hero who died so that you could be born, so that our people could have a future.'" Anne's voice trembled for a fraction of a second. I spent hours there that day, reading every name I could, and I made them a promise. I promised we would never forget what they did for us, that we would live up to the gift they gave us, and that if the Curie ever needed us, we would come running. Sella stared at her, a look of profound understanding on her face. You kept your promise. Anne offered a small, resolute smile. Humans always keep their promises, or we die trying. It's a core part of who we are. Sella's bioluminescent skin shimmered with warm golds and gentle blues, an outward display of pure gratitude. You've given us our future back. How could we ever repay you? Anne's smile grew a little wider. You already did. 300 years ago, as far as I'm concerned, the slate is clean. But they both understood it wasn't so simple. This wasn't about settling a debt. True friendship never is. It's about watching each other's backs and working together to build a better universe. And across the galaxy, other civilizations were paying attention. They spoke in hushed tones about humanity's return, which had been less of a quiet re-entry and more of a thunderous roar. In just a few hours, they had completely dismantled a major military force. They had defied the Galactic Council, and they had rescued a dying race, not for money or power, but because they felt it was the right thing to do. Some were terrified of them, others were inspired by them, and a few, hidden away in forgotten star systems, started to wonder, if they were ever in trouble, would humanity come for them too? Back on Earth, people were celebrating. They had honored a pledge made 3 centuries before. The debt had been paid. But it was more than just that. Humanity had just served notice to the entire galaxy. We have returned. We are strong. And we have no tolerance for bullies. The era of human isolation was finished. The era of human influence was just getting started. 5 years passed in a flash, and the galaxy adjusted to having humans as part of the community. The change was gradual, but it was undeniable. On the Curie homeworlds, cities that had been dark for decades were now radiant with light. The sound of children's laughter echoed through parks that had once been somber memorials. Their population shot past 1 billion and continued to climb. The human doctor's gene therapy had been successful beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Matriarch Sella stood on a high balcony, watching shuttles weave through sky lanes that had been utterly empty just a few years prior. Beside her stood Anne Brooks, a little older now, but with the same unbreakable confidence that all humans seem to possess. We're naming a city after your grandmother, Sella said, her eyes fixed on the bustling metropolis below. And we're naming a university after Dr. Okoye and a star system after Admiral Stone. We want to ensure no one ever forgets. We would be deeply honored, Anne replied quietly. But you don't owe us anything more. Sella finally turned to face her. This has nothing to do with debt. This is about friendship. It's about remembering that when our light was about to be extinguished, humanity came to our aid. On the streets below, Curie and humans collaborated on new architectural and research initiatives. A deep bond had been forged between them. The Curie were in awe of the humans' relentless energy and ingenuity, while the humans were captivated by the Curie's thoughtful and artistic spirit. The Council keeps sending envoys, Anne noted casually. They're eager to discuss formal treaties. Sella looked curious. And will you entertain them? Anne flashed a clever smile. Perhaps. But it will be on our terms. We have zero interest in joining their council. But we are open to discussing trade, diplomacy, and defense agreements with anyone who holds the same values we do. They're still on edge about what happened to the Vosh, Sella remarked. After the irrefutable evidence of their attempted genocide was made public, the Vosh Concordat had been slammed with crippling sanctions by the Council. Their military was in shambles, their leadership was deposed, and they were paying enormous reparations to the Curie. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was justice. The Vosh needed to learn a lesson, Anne stated, her voice firm. You don't get to commit genocide just because it's convenient. Your actions have consequences. Some species are saying humanity is too aggressive. And some species mistake mercy for weakness, Anne retorted. We proved them wrong. We could have erased the Vosh from existence. We chose not to. We gave them an opportunity to become better. That isn't aggression. That's justice with a backbone. At that moment, a young Curie girl approached them, clutching a data tablet. She seemed a bit shy, but incredibly determined. Ambassador Brooks, she asked, her English flawless. For my history project, I'm researching the human ship, the Endless Dawn. Could you tell me why you named your flagship after our ancient colony vessel? Anne knelt down to meet the girl's gaze, her entire demeanor softening in an instant. Because we wanted the entire galaxy to remember what your people did for ours. The first Endless Dawn carried 50,000 Curie who sacrificed everything to save Earth. Our ship bears their name to honor them and to remind us of why we are out here in the first place. The little girl's face lit up. My teacher says that humans always remember their debts. Your teacher is correct, Anne affirmed. We do. But more importantly, we remember our friends, and the Curie will always be our friends. The child smiled, offered her thanks, and scurried away. Sella's skin glowed a warm, brilliant gold. You have a natural gift with children, she observed. I have 3 nieces back home, Anne said as she stood up. They ask me 1,000,000 questions a day. It keeps me in practice. For a long while, they just stood there, letting the comfortable quiet wash over them as they watched the city lights pulse below. Sella finally broke the silence. You know, other worlds are starting to call, not the big council guys, but the smaller, independent systems. They're asking about you, Anne. They want to know if humanity would come to their rescue, too. We've heard, Anne said with a nod. There's a mining colony with a nasty pirate problem, a research station in the middle of a medical meltdown, 2 systems about to tear each other apart. It seems like everyone wants a human hero. So will you be? Sella asked, her voice soft. Anne took a deep breath. We'll step in when we can, where we think we can actually help, and only if the cause is right. But we're not signing up to be the galaxy's police force. It's not our job to run everything for everyone. Our job is to be good neighbors, Anne continued, and to stick up for the folks who can't stick up for themselves. Sella chuckled softly. The galaxy isn't going to know what to do with you. They're used to conquerors or empires that couldn't care less. You're different. We're friends, Anne said, like it was the simplest thing in the universe. We help our friends, and we're pretty good at making new ones. That's just how we do things. Later that night, Anne sat down to compose her official report for Earth. Her room was a treasure trove of gifts from dozens of species that had reached out over the last few years. Gorgeous works of art, incredible pieces of technology. Every single one was a bridge to a new friendship. This is Ambassador Ann Brooks's 5-year report from Curie Space, she started. The Curie population has now reached 1.3 billion, and it's still climbing. The genetic plague that nearly wiped them out? It's completely gone. They're not just getting by anymore. They're flourishing. She paused, thinking for a second. Our relationship with the Galactic Council is, well, it's a mixed bag. In the same breath, they'll tell you they're scared of us, that they respect us, and that they desperately need us. We've officially opened relations with 17 independent species. Trade is through the roof. And maybe, most importantly, we've already stopped 3 wars from ever starting, just by getting people to a negotiating table. Anne leaned back in her chair, a real sense of pride washing over her. The galaxy is figuring out that you can't just shove humanity around. But they're also figuring out that we're not the boogeymen they all thought we were. We're looking for partners, not puppets. We offer a hand up, not an iron fist. And we have absolutely zero patience for genocide, slavery, or any other crime against intelligent life. A small smile played on her lips. Some of the more paranoid species have started calling us Death World Protectors. They think it's an insult, but honestly, I kind of like the sound of it. We grew up in a tough neighborhood, so we learned how to defend what's ours. The way we see it now, the whole galaxy is our neighborhood, not to control, but to watch over. Anne sent the report flying through the stars. She walked to her window, just gazing out at the ocean of light. Trillions of lives were happening out there right now. Some in peace, some in turmoil. And for the first time in 300 years, humanity was finally part of it all again. Not as conquerors, and definitely not as servants, but as equals, as friends, as the people who, no matter what, always keep their word. A gentle chime broke her thoughts. It was Reth asking to come in. Anne smiled and accepted. The old Curie had become one of her closest friends and a trusted advisor. He entered, his skin shifting to a calm, pleasant blue. "Good evening, Anne. I'm not interrupting, am I?" "Never, Reth," she said warmly. "What's going on?" Reth settled into a chair specially designed for his 4-armed body. "I needed to thank you," Reth began, his voice quiet but filled with the gratitude of his entire race. "And I don't just mean for saving my people. That's a debt we can never hope to repay. I mean for reminding the galaxy of something it worked so hard to forget." "And what's that?" Anne asked, her eyes still lost in the star-dusted night outside. "That honor still means something," he said. "That your word should be your promise, that doing the right thing, especially when it's the hardest thing, that's what really defines you. The galaxy became so jaded, Anne. It was all about money and power. You reminded us there are things worth fighting for that aren't just for yourself." He sat across from her, the moment feeling heavy with history. "We learned that from the 50,000 people you lost to save us. They taught us what real sacrifice is, what a true hero looks like. We're just trying our best to be worthy of that." "Oh, but you are," Reth insisted, his tone absolute. "More than you'll ever realize. Have you heard what the young Curie say now, when they're up against a seemingly impossible task?" Anne just shook her head, curious. They ask each other, "What would a human do?" A real, genuine smile spread across Reth's face. They mean it as the biggest compliment possible. Humans never give up. Humans figure it out. Humans protect their friends no matter what it takes. You've become the symbol of hope for a whole new generation. That's a lot to live up to, Anne said, her voice barely a whisper. It is, Reth agreed. But if anyone can handle that weight, it's your people. You were born in the heart of a death world. You didn't just hang on. You thrived when everything was trying to kill you. And now, you're using that incredible strength to lift everyone else up. There is no greater purpose than that. They talked for hours, brainstorming ideas, sharing dreams, and mapping out a universe of brand new possibilities. The Curie were thrilled to propose a joint research project with humanity. A few other species were already asking about forming defense alliances, and rumors were spreading along the star lanes about a species on the outer rim facing certain doom from a natural disaster, wondering if maybe, just maybe, these humans were their last shot at survival. When Reth finally left, Anne was back at the window, staring out at everything and nothing. 5 years ago, she had arrived in this system expecting to write the final chapter of a dying race, maybe offer a little comfort as their light went out. Instead, she got to be part of their rescue. Instead, humanity had re-entered the galactic community with a bang that no one could ever ignore. The debt was settled. The Curie would have a future. And humanity had proven that the tough creatures from that little death world weren't just a force to be reckoned with. They were also fiercely loyal, deeply honorable, and would never, ever back down from a fight for what's right. Some species were terrified of that. Others looked on in admiration. But every last one of them finally understood. Anne rested her hand on the cool glass of the viewport. Out there, scattered across a million suns, other peoples were watching, waiting, and wondering what these strange, stubborn apes from Earth were going to do next. Wondering if maybe, just maybe, humanity would come and help them too. And the answer, Anne knew deep in her soul, would always be yes. If you need help, we'll be there. If you're our friend, we'll have your back. And if you prey on the innocent, we will get in your way. That's just who we are. It's who we've always been. The galaxy had held its breath when humanity first showed up to repay its debt. But now, that fear was slowly but surely melting away into something completely new. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was trust. It was the growing realization that somewhere in the vast emptiness there was a people who would stand against the darkness, who would honor their promises, and who would never, ever leave a friend behind. 300 years of painful isolation were finally over. The age of humanity had dawned, and the galaxy, for better or worse, was just going to have to get used to it. But Anne had a gut feeling it was going to be for the better. Humanity had learned a powerful lesson from the Curie's sacrifice. They had made themselves worthy of that gift, and now they would spend forever making sure no one else ever had to face the end all alone. The debt was paid, but the real job, the incredible task of building a better, kinder galaxy, was just getting started, and humanity was more than ready.